Hey guys, this is John, and I'm back for another edition of Climbing the Tactics Training Ladder. We're at 2154, 131 problems solved, 129 of them successful, so let's keep that up. Into the first problem. Bishop c2 hitting the knight, which is attacked 3 times, but this rook on e1 is undefended. I don't see any checks. Knight takes f2 is a capture that catches my eye. But we do have to watch out for queen h5 check. White could throw the queen here. Our king is exposed. What about pawn d3? Pawn d3 opens that bishop on b6. Then we have the bishop and the knight firing against f2. So if d3, that check, we always just sidestep it, king g8. I don't think that's a big deal. And after the bishop takes, then we take on f2, probably with the bishop. Knight takes is also pretty good. I wonder which way is stronger. I'd say bishop takes is more clinical, just forking the king and the rook. So I don't see anything else. I mean, knight takes f2 was tempting, but I'm not as sure about it. There's the check on h5 and then take on e8. So I'm going to go with d3. An interference move that opens the bishop. And problem solved for 4 points. So let's just explore what happens if white does take on d3. So then bishop takes f2 check. I would assume king f1 and bishop takes e1. And so long as the check never hurts us, queen h5, king g8, I don't see white escaping here and avoiding great material loss. And white could check on the first move as well after d3 is played. They could play queen h5 check, but same thing. We sidestep. Maybe there's bishop g5 to take into consideration, but the primary components of this tactic are still in place. And actually, this just drops the knight on f5, doesn't it? Next problem. Black has a strong attack against white's king. The first moves you look at here are knight c3 check or rook takes b3, both pretty violent forcing moves. Knight c3 check, white would have to play king a1. And I want to mate him on a2, but of course white's queen defends. And meanwhile, we have some stuff to think about in terms of our own king. So rook takes b3, pawn takes b3, queen takes b3 check. Then what? If king a1, I suppose queen a3 check. And then once the king lands on b1 again, we can throw the rook over with check. So that seems good. Rook takes b3, a takes b3, king c1. There's queen a3. And if king c2, queen b2 is mate. If king b1, rook b8 again is crushing. So I'm liking the look of that. If rook takes b3, king a1, I think rook b2 should win. I know that white can play g takes h7 check, but king h8, and there's nothing decisive for white. We cover the f7 square, so knight f7 will just run into the capture. So I like this continuation, just double checking. Yeah, I'm going to go with this move. It's pretty darn forcing too, and problem solved. Let's play through the hypothetical continuation after queen takes b3 check, or continuations, because white could play either king c1 or king a1. So if king a1, I was ready to play this check. And if queen a2 to block, we have queen c3. White can't go to b2 because we cover that square twice. So king b1, and now the rook comes over. White has to give up their queen, checkmate. So we can refute that easily. Likewise, if king b1, then rook b8, the rook joins. As soon as that rook comes into the action, along with the queen and the knight, it's over. Nothing is going to save black. And the only other line to consider was king c1, and that's more of the same. Queen a3. If the king goes here, trying to stay out of the b file, then we get this nice epaulette mate, with the king unable to go to d3 or d1. And if king b1, you know the story by now. Rook b8 check. Not a super hard problem. Just comparing rook takes b3 and knight c3 check. Knight c3, while tempting, doesn't seem to lead anywhere after this. White's queen controls a2. So just deciding between two forcing moves. If neither of those had worked, then I would have looked at other stuff, like maybe even just taking back, although that would not be in the spirit of a tactics trainer problem. White has a queen against a rook and a knight, but black does have several extra pawns. White's back rank is not too exposed. They can always escape to h2. Knight c3 forks the queen and the rook. So if knight c3 Rook takes d4, what am I doing then? Knight takes b5, rook takes d8 being the idea. King c7. That endgame looks pretty good for black. I've got 3 dangerous pawns, but I don't think that's going to be the solution. Maybe we throw in the check first. So play rook d1 check, king h2, and then knight c3. That way we still get the fork, but white can't play rook takes d4 and get material. So they're just going to have to move their queen. Then we take a4. And I think with 2 rooks against the white queen and still maintaining those pawns on the queen side, black should win without a problem. So that's my line right now. Rook d1, king h2, knight c3 with the fork. There's no immediate danger to our king. White has no good checks. So yeah, white is not escaping there. And again, the problem with the immediate knight c3 is rook takes d4. I'm not seeing any other improvement in this variation. I don't think we're going to win any more material than that. Knight d6, there's always rook takes d4 at the very least. Yeah, I'm going to go with this one. So deliver the check and then give the fork. And clean up this material. Okay. So another forcing move, rook d1. And as often happens when I'm solving these problems, my first instinct is not necessarily going to be correct. So the fact that knight c3 was the move I wanted to play, and the move that looks good, is not going to deter me from looking for something better. Because after knight c3, rook takes d4, knight takes b5 here, I mean, I suspect that this would still be a tough defense for white. I know they have a majority on the king side, 3 versus 2, but these pawns are mighty, and they'll be advancing quick with the help of the knight. But that's probably not the solution. And given that we have this easier way to execute the fork without having to allow rook takes d4, this looks correct. And I do believe in the final position after this. Black should win this endgame pretty easily. I'll just have to advance my pawns carefully, not allow the white queen too much range to check me. And with the pawn buffer, that's not going to happen. There's going to be no perpetual if black exercises some caution. So here, white just walked right into the skewer. Rook g8 check. Rook g1 looks like an atrocious move. It'd be hard to believe there's anything better than that. And rook g8. If not for rook g8, black is in for a tough defense. They're down material. Piece for a pawn. Yeah, I don't know what this problem is doing in the... Okay, well, this surprises me. The problem is going on. So I guess the task now is to avoid a draw with white eliminating the last pawn. Possibly I should have thought about this, but the first move was so obvious, I just had to play it. Okay, so if d3, king, e4, and black will succeed, or white will succeed in eliminating that last black pawn. If king c5, there's knight b3 check, but then king c4, knight takes d4, we have rook to e1 check, winning the piece. So do we like king c5? King c5, knight e4 check, king c4. White can kind of chase our king around. Knight d6 maybe. But then king d3, I suppose. King d3, knight b5, we have rook g5. So king c5 is my instinct right now. King c5 if knight b3, king c4. Knight d2 or knight a5, we can go to d3 in both cases. Looks good. There's also rook d1, maybe, or even rook g2 attacking the knight. Rook d1, what happens then? Because then the d-pawn might advance. The knight moves, the d-pawn goes. Rook d1, knight e4, d3. King d4, d2, king d3. The pawn is lost. I think I need the help of the king. I like that more. Okay, I'm going to do this. Oh, incorrect. The streak is finally destroyed. I had solved so many problems correctly leading up to this one, but nope, incorrect right there. I don't know. I mean, it's quite possible that this move also works. Because, okay, let's explore this. So this is the solution now. We get to this position, and rook g2 is the move. Okay, rook g2 followed by pushing the pawn. Yeah, maybe this is just the cleaner way to do it. I looked at rook d1, but then I neglected to look at rook g2. I suspect this is a case where the move I played still wins, but the intended solution is just cleaner. And yeah, that's a good point. I did not get it correct in its entirety if that was the case. Rook g2, the knight has to move somewhere. Then the pawn is advancing. The difference here is that when the pawn reaches d2, there's no rook on d1 blocking it from promoting. So white just has to give up their knight to prevent promotion. Black will win no problem after that. Maybe I just like harmony too much. I like having my pieces coordinate with each other, so king c5 appealed to me. Having the king help out, but I think it's just unnecessary. But the main point of suggesting king up to c5 is that if this happens and white tries to eliminate the pawn, then they're going to lose their knight with this check, and we take on d4. You might have to watch for some circumstances where it takes a while to force white to give up their knight for the pawn, and in the meantime, white is advancing their own f-pawn, which might eventually require me to sacrifice my rook, and then the position is just drawn, king versus king. But yes, I do suspect that black will still win after king to c5. I don't see a good way for white to eliminate that remaining pawn. If ever these checks occur, we can run to d3. And as I mentioned, if knight b5 trying to take on d4, then rook g5 check skewers the king to the knight. Okay, so I got this one wrong, but I'm not going to beat myself up too much. On to the next problem. A rook endgame. So we can check on a5 and then trade rooks and get this into a king and pawn endgame. Or we can start grabbing pawns. We have the option of taking on a7 or h6. f4 is also intriguing. F4 is kind of cool because black's rook is pretty much stuck, right? If we play f4 and the rook moves over to h5, then rook a5 cleanly wins the rook. There's not even a trade after that. So maybe black will be in zugzwang pretty soon. f4, all they can do is push pawns. There's no king move that will help them. The king can't go to e5. If king c5, we get the check and win the rook. So f4 paralyzes black's position. And I think they're just going to run out of pawn moves. Let's say f4, f6, h3, h5, h4, h6. Then we can play a3, just a waiting move. And eventually black will have to move the rook to an attack square, or more likely play king c5 and allow the skewer. Yeah, I like it. I'm going to do it. And now probably h4. That seems smart. It's just to make sure that black's rook is truly stuck and that h4 won't help black out at all. Just count our tempi. h4, f6, a3, h6, a4. Black is in zugzwang. Okay. Problem solved. So if this were to continue, let's say f6, then a3, h6, and a4. And see how we made two steps with the pawn? First to a3 and then to a4. That's good usage of your tempi, your pawn tempi in an endgame. Because the point is not to get the pawn advanced. The point is to run black out of moves. And if we had first played a4 right here, well, then after h6, if we push the pawn further, we're taking away the square that our rook wants to check on. So we're not concerned about getting the pawn up. We're just trying to run black out of available moves. So a3, h6, a4, zugzwang, stuck rook, a useless rook. Aside from rook e5, rook g5, rook takes f4, black's only other move is king here, and that will allow check and pick up the rook entirely. I like that problem. The thing that caused me to look at this idea of trapping the rook was the pawn structure. The pawn structure is really poor for black. He's got all these isolated pawns, and that prevents him from being able to attack white structure easily and trying to create some escape avenue for the rook, if that makes sense. If, let's say, this pawn were on g5, then after f4, black could play, or sorry, g7, black could play g5 and offer an exchange for the pawn on f4 and maybe wriggle free after that. I mean, maybe even there white can play king e3, but with the pawns as they are, it's hard for black to make contact with white's structure, and the structure is the thing locking in the black rook on f5. If I hadn't quickly spotted that idea, I would have pursued the whole rook a5 check, king e6, rook takes f5, king takes f5 line of thought. Because my thinking there was to send the king over to the queen side, play king c4, king b5, king a6, take the pawn on a7, try to run the a pawn. We'd have to calculate if black's king could try to come in and win the king side pawns in time to create counterplay. But unnecessary in view of the rook trap. I assume this is a white to move and draw tactic. I don't think it would be anything other than that. So examining forcing moves, I'm looking at knight f5, but black could take either way. Sacrificing the knight stands out because white is almost stalemated with the king on h6, but with the knight and the pawn remaining, it'll take some care to set that up. So probably e6 is the best way to start this. e6, hit the rook. If, let's say, rook f4, then king takes h7, rook takes d4, king g7, or king g6 probably better to shoulder the enemy king. I think that just draws. Yeah, black's king is in a poor position, and our king can help the e-pawn. So if e6, let's say rook e7, then knight f5 is working, isn't it? Knight f5 check, bishop takes f5, and black's rook on e7 is blocking the pawn. So if e6, what if the rook moves to c7, b7, or a7? Let's say rook c7. Then probably still, actually maybe e7 there. So if we play knight f5 check right away, bishop takes f5, e7, there's bishop d7 spoiling the stalemate. So e7 first. And again, I think the position will be drawn. Rook takes e7, knight f5 check, same stalemate. Yeah, let's do this. And now e7. Note that at bishop g6, we can take it with the king. Ah, this I did not anticipate. So if we queen, black is trying to play rook h7 mate. I can play knight f3, though. Does knight f3 spoil black's fun? Trying to deflect the bishop so it doesn't guard h7. Knight f5 isn't going to do the trick, so knight f3, though, might be the way. Knight f3, bishop takes, we queen. Yeah, that looks good. And knight f3, if king to g4, then knight e5 check. And that might wind up in a weird perpetual. King back to h4, knight f3. Okay. Yeah, and now knight e5. Just checking, checking, checking once again. It's a sharp position, so I don't mind spending a couple extra seconds. Knight h2 might also do the trick. But knight e5 is pretty clean. King f4. And now... Again, I didn't anticipate this move. I'm missing a couple things in this one. So with the king on f4, they're still threatening mate if I queen. Knight d3, do I just keep pursuing? Ah, that doesn't help though, they just take it. Ah, wow. Knight g6, bishop takes g6, queen. And bishop takes e8 is a new stalemate, with the bishop controlling h5 this time. That is cool. That works. Unusual stalemate pattern. But yeah, that does appear to work. Okay, tough problem. Got 4 points out of it, but I was not as precise with my visualization as I should have been, my calculation. Because I should have seen that after king g4, knight e5 check, king f4 is still going to threaten mate on h7. So white cannot queen here. So I had to think on the fly, as I tend not like to have to do in these tactics problems, and find knight g6. So fortunately, white is still drawing the position. But maybe I should have spent more time initially working through that continuation. This is kind of a long problem. Let's explore that. So e6, attacking the rook. And one line I mentioned is if rook d4 going after the knight, then yeah, I think e7 is going to run into rook e4. So better to play king takes h7, take here, and now king g6, shouldering the black king, making sure it can't go to g5. And white's king is close enough to help escort this pawn to promotion. Black's going to have to give up the rook. And if rook e7, there's a draw immediately. Knight f5 check, bishop takes f5, stalemate. The pawn is blocked. So the only thing remaining is for black to play what they played in the problem answer, rook c7. And then it just requires some care, right? Did black play rook c7? Yeah, I think it was rook c7. I don't think it matters if rook c7, b7, or a7. It's all the same. But now here, bishop e4, because if black takes, there's check, forking the king and the rook. Stalemate again. So bishop e4. And this is a nice detail. And I failed to appreciate all this. So if queen now, rook h7 mate. Fortunately, our knight can wheel around, and we want to check on a square where if black takes it, then their bishop is deflected from guarding h7. So now this would be successful for white. But yeah, again, a little sloppy. I didn't fully grasp what was happening here. Sorry, after knight f3 check, king g4, knight e5. If king back to h4, knight f3 is a perpetual. I guess even knight g6 would work for the same reason. But after king f4, I had to find knight g6. Take, and then the very neat stalemate after bishop takes e8. Difficult problem. They're getting tougher, guys. Let's keep going. All right, so rook takes f7 is the move that catches my eye. Rook takes f7, knight takes f7, queen takes e6, followed by queen takes f7 is mate. So on rook takes f7, black would have to play king takes d6. But then queen e6 is mate. So this one may be simple. I spotted the solution right away, I believe. Yeah, nothing in the way of a defense for black. Okay. Go take that. And take here. I used to get nervous in such situations because I once played a game where someone tried to play in a position like this, king takes e6, and then argued that since the knight is pinned to the king on g1, that knight takes e6 cannot be played, which of course is just nonsense, and king takes e6 is illegal here. But I was a fairly low-rated player at the time, and I remember that incident. So I was nervous about making such moves after that for a little while, but I've gotten over that. I think one of the reasons I found this so fast, I played a bullet game against this guy Jorge Samor Hasbun, who is NECF in schools on ICC. And I had a very similar tactic involving a rook takes f7 move. And I lost that game, but it was the only resource in the position. And here it just happens to win for white. And the other line is if after rook takes f7, king takes d6, queen takes e6 is mate, supported by the knight. If rook takes f7 hadn't worked, I would have to look at other forcing moves, like maybe a knight coming to f5 check, maybe queen takes g7, something like that. It's a really messy position, but lucky for me, the very first move I looked at pans out. Another rook endgame. So black's pawn is going this way. I thought for a second I was looking at this from white side, but black's pawn is 2 squares away from promoting on e1. So promotion is the goal. So pushing e2, what will white do? If rook e5, then rook e6 is likely just a win. So if e2, if they play rook d5 check, we have rook d6. That will be similar. So maybe they're going to check on f7. e2, rook f7 check, but then king f8. And I think white should lose that. So what is the catch? e2 is so obvious, I'm worried. There's always a catch. Not always, but oftentimes. We might evaluate what happens if white gives up the rook for the pawn, but I think that should be a pretty easy win. with black's king so centralized and close to both the F and the B pawns. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and play this. And we're going to do this. Problem solved. They threw in an easy one. Only 1 point on that, but yeah, nothing to this one. So after rook e6, white has to give up the rook for the pawn. Checking on d5 will always amount to nothing after king e7. Pawn promotes still. We're controlling the d1 square as well. And after rook takes e2, b6. This should be a pretty simple mop-up job. We could think about rook f2 trying to corral the f-pawn first. So let's say like rook f2, king, what would be the best square? Maybe king a7. Take here. Check. Yeah, and this will win. If king b6, check, followed by putting the king on c7, stopping the pawn. Pawn endgame this time. King h6, threatening at h5. So king activity is key in pawn endgames. Do we want to bring the king up to g3, or do we send it around to a5 and try to go after c6? That looks too far-fetched, though. King d2, king takes h5, king c3, king h4, king b4, king g3, king a5. Nah, it's not going to work. Take f3, king b6. We're too slow. So king f2, king takes h5, king g3, trying to muscle our way up to g4. Then let's say probably king h6, so that if king to g4, king g6. Yeah, and white's in trouble there. If f4 at that point, then g takes f4, king takes f4, king h5, and black is going to outflank us. So precision is required. Maybe white's just playing for a draw at the maximum. I think that's the case. King g3, king takes h5. Or sorry, king f2, king takes h5, king g3, king h6. We probably have to hang back with our king and play king h3. That way, if king g6 is ever played, then we play king g4, stopping the king from coming up to f5. Yeah, and in playing that way, I think it's just a draw. So we have to check our aspirations here and realize that we're not better, and a draw is a good result. Okay, let's do that. King up. And king h6 was played. So if king g4, king g6, and white's in zugzwang, they'd have to play f4, g takes f4, king takes f4, king h5. White will lose the pawns. So we're just going to play this move instead. And now we'll go back and prevent the king from coming up to f5. So past that problem, got 6 points. Oh, I meant to... Did I not click analysis? 1 second. Could have sworn I clicked analysis, and now I'm just getting a blank board. Chess.com glitch. Okay, well, not much to analyze on this one, but just the fact that you want to consider where the black king is going and realize that it's trying to reach f5. So king g4, despite being the natural move, would lose after king g6 for the reason I described. An opposition theme at work here. Okay, next problem. I think I've seen a problem like this before. So black eventually wants to try to win the h2 pawn and promote one of their h-pawns. I think we go king a8. There's only 2 moves for white, and I'm pretty sure king a8 is the starting move. Because you want to approach so that when black plays king takes h2, you're ready to play king f2 at the very end. So if king a8, let's say king c5, king... Does it matter if we go to b7 or a7? I don't know that it really does. We should probably go to b7. King b7, king d4, king c6, king e3, king d5, king f2. Wait, that doesn't work. King b5, king f2, king e4, king g2. Oh, that does work. Never mind. King e3, king takes h2, king f2. Whereas if we play king c8, then he can play king c6, and he's getting closer to the h-pawn while shouldering our king. So yeah, let's do this. King there. And now I think I want to press up the board king a7, or back down the board. rather. Yeah, so let's do this. King here. We're proceeding in this diagonal route. And now king f2. Important drawing motif. Boxing black's king into the corner. Stalemate. So let's illustrate what would happen if king c8, so the natural move, trying to go the other way, thinking, well, we should get close to the pawns, should we not? Because if king c8, then black can play this move, king c6, taking the opposition, preventing white from reaching the 7th rank. And if king d8, at some point black's just going to cut up like this, and I think it will just be a win. Let's see. Ah, no, but even in this case, yeah, right, but here white does not reach f2. That's the thing. They're 1 square away from reaching the f2 square. And if right here after king 2, let's say f3, king g5, this is not going to cut it as well. Black wins h2 and guards h3. King g4, king g2, pawn promotes. So that's why we need to play king a8 to start, and then start to chase the black king. We have no interest in actually cutting up and trying to win these pawns. We just need a clear path to go diagonally as black goes diagonally down to h2, if that makes sense. So if black had played king c5 right away, king b7, if they go king b5, then I think we could do something similar. Yeah, like king a7 would still work here. And if ever black cuts, we're cutting with them. And this is another example of this line. Here, king d3 would be good. King g2, and eventually get this in and box black's king into the corner. Nice problem. Good motif there. Okay, rook h8. So we got queen and rook on the first rank. There's pressure on h1 and g1. Bishop takes f3 is the move I'd like to start with. But maybe rook takes e8 then? Rook takes e8, and they're on our queen. So bishop takes f3, rook takes e8. Queen takes e8. Worried about that pawn. Queen takes f3 even then. That pawn is hard to stop. And our coordination is not good. So bishop takes f3, maybe not the way. We can't check on e5. White's knight guards that square. If queen h1, queen takes h1, rook takes h1 check, king takes h1, might not even be forced. King g3 might be good there. Yeah, I don't think that line is working. So I'm back to bishop takes f3. Ah, there's also rook e2. Took me a while to see rook e2, but rook e2 is nice. Skewering the queen to the king. That stops any queen g3 business trying to trade queens. So rook e2, maybe rook d8 check, but then we can try to run away with our king. Let's say king c6. And if knight e7, king b7. If rook b8 check, we take it, and our bishop controls g8. That's key. Rook e2 must be working. Yeah, I don't see a defense for white after that. And with our bishop sitting on d5 at all times, this has got to be good. Problem solved. Okay, only 1 point. Struggled to get that one as well. Didn't see it for a minute or so. So I was looking at bishop takes f3. But this pins the queen, and if white delivers a check on d8, so rook d8, king c6, the queen is never any consequence to us for 2 reasons, really. Our bishop controls g8. Also, we're ready to play a check on either g1 or h1 and just win. Actually, this check on g2 might even be cleaner, right? Because king takes, then queen g1 is mate. And after rook d8, king c6, white could throw in knight e7, but king b7, our king gets to safety. If rook b8 check, I think just take, promote, bishop takes, white runs out of ammunition. Remember, queen takes, g8 cannot be played. White's queen is pinned. So we're edging near 2200. Ah, I've got this problem before. This is the exact same problem I did in the last video, right? A repeat problem. Well, if you want to see my explanation on this one, you can go check out the previous video. I don't think there's anything different about it, so I'm just going to play the solution from last time. And I think it was knight d6 here. Yeah, attacking the rook. And then there's all these forking possibilities no matter where the rook goes. Black will play rook f3, and then we play king g2, as I recall. Yeah, and black's rook runs out of good squares, and then eventually we can deliver this check. So that's a shame to see a repeated problem. But with that problem, I get 8 points, and I'm over 2200. We can't stop on that one, though. Got to do at least a couple more. So bishop to e3, rook takes f3, bishop takes, and then where's my checkmate? Queen g4, king h1. Maybe there is no mate after that. The bishop on d4 will be hanging, though, or under attack, I should say, from the knight. If we play bishop takes e3 right away, then pawn takes e3, and white's rook is helping to defend the bishop. So let's proceed with that original line. Rook takes f3, bishop takes d4. Queen g4 check, king h1. And then maybe rook d3, pinning the bishop to the queen. We're also guarding d1 that way. That looks attractive. Can they play f3, though? f3 hitting our queen. There's also bishop takes g7 ideas with the discovered attack on the rook on d3. That complicates things. Well, what if we play rook takes f3, bishop takes d4, then rook d3 without the check on g4? That way, if bishop takes g7 check, queen takes g7 check. Respond to a check with a check. So rook takes f3, bishop takes d4, rook to d3. The only way white can defend the bishop is to play a rook to d1, but then we play queen g4 and rook takes d1, or rook takes d1 straight away. Yeah, I like that. So hold off on the queen g4 check move. All right, and problem solved. If the problem had continued, so one line is if bishop takes g7, hoping for king takes g7, queen takes d3, we have check. And the other line is if white brings a rook to d1, let's say rook bd1, then we can either play queen g4 right away or take on d1, take, then check, pick up the rook with check next move. It's important that it's with check, because the king has to go to f1 or g1. If it was not with check, then white could play that bishop takes g7 move again. Yeah, and this doesn't make a difference, does it? Because if we check first and then here, we can take d1, bishop takes g7, white will still be down a piece. But I think rook takes d1 is a little cleaner on the previous move. So in this one, there was a problem with the original line that we calculated. Bishop e3, rook takes f3, bishop takes d4. I wanted to play queen g4 check. That's so obvious. Just attack the king with tempo and then play rook d3. But it ran into bishop takes g7. And I'm so attuned to trying to improve on existing lines that you've calculated that I just naturally switched up the order of moves and said, well, if this is a problem in this line, what if we leave the king on g1, leave the queen on d7, so bishop takes g7 can be met by queen takes g7. And that happens to work. So always try to change up those move orders when you're calculating. That's super important. That's one thing I've harped on constantly in this Climbing the Tactics Training Ladder series. Let's do two more problems. A4. So material is almost equal. Black is down a pawn. There's this tension between the rooks. So rook takes e4, bishop takes e4. I want to get my queen involved, so I was thinking queen over to e8, attacking the bishop. And an important aspect of this position is that white's queen can't help the bishop that's attacked on e4 if I play that way. So the bishop would have to move somewhere. Let's say bishop back to f3. And then I should be able to check. But king f1. And white might be holding. I want my bishop to come to c4 eventually. So maybe a timely bishop f8. So rook takes e4, bishop takes e4, queen e8. And then probably bishop f3. Don't think bishop c2 or anything makes a difference. So bishop f3, queen e3 check. If king h1, queen c1 will lead to mate. So king f1, and then bishop f8. The sting at the end of the variation. Then the queen is forced somewhere where it cannot guard c4. Now, the only thing left to consider is if I can tweak the move order somehow and make it cleaner, but I don't think so. I think this move order is good. Yeah, I'm going to go with this move order. So take, queen over, get that queen involved. It's sitting in the corner. We got to do something about that. So check. And now bishop f8. b6, there's queen takes c6. So bishop f8, on the other hand, is a lot easier. We get this check in. And the problem continues. Okay. So here, I think just bishop takes e2. Queen c1 is not going to work after king f2 or bishop e1. So yeah, bishop takes e2 check. Winning a piece and the game. Problem solved. Nice one. All the pieces working together in that one. We had to trade the rooks, activate the queen, and then use both the bishops in concert to set up bishop c4. And the primary way I solved this is just looking at our goal, especially in this position. Like, this is the key position for the variation. We want to get the bishop to c4, but it's covered by the queen. And you should next think, how can you deflect the queen? How can you reach the position with the bishop on c4? And we only have two deflection moves, pawn b6 or bishop f8. But if we play that pawn b6 move, then queen takes c6 is possible, and white still monitors that square. So bishop f8 has to be it. No queen takes c6. Queen b4 not possible. That's another problem with b6, by the way. Yeah, white's going to have to go somewhere like they played e5. Check. Bishop e2, and then we take. Take with a bishop, very important. If we take with a queen, white can trade queens like that. Equal material. You figured it has to be something with the queen here, because the queen is just sitting in the corner. It's unlikely that black will be able to land some decisive blow without including that piece. I like that problem. Last one of the session. Let's try to end on a positive note. Queen takes h3. Probably not going to work. Forcing move, but that's coming up empty. So queen takes f4. Obvious move. Queen takes f4. King back to h1. I want this bishop to help out in the attack, but that's a little tricky, right? It's stuck behind this pawn chain. So maybe queen e4 check. Queen takes f4, king h1, queen e4 check. If the king moves, queen g2 is mate. And if f3, I suspect we can go over and attack h3. Yeah, maybe queen f5 there. Queen f5, hit the pawn. If f4... Ooh, queen e4, there's queen f3. That's not quite working. I thought that was very close, but it's not working. We always have this deflecting move d4. So queen takes f4, king h1, d4. Hit the queen. Let's say queen d3 in that case. Bishop c6 is not possible, though. I still think there's something promising with queen takes f4, king h1, queen e4 check. Force that f3 move. f3 has to be weakening somehow. Queen e2 is tempting, but rook g1 appears to hold. What about after f3, queen to g6, threatening queen g2 mate? White would have to play queen d2 or queen b2. Let's say queen d2. They're barely holding. Where is the killer blow? Queen takes f4, king h1. Queen e4, f3. I feel it. I feel like we're close. I just can't find the right move. Queen e2, there's rook g1. That kills our play. Also important to note that the queen on c3 guards the h8 square, so I can't ever play rook h8 unless it's protected by the queen. Trying to think if that d4 move ever helps black. But I'm not seeing where it would be useful. So the best line I have right now is queen takes f4, king h1, queen e4 check, f3, and then queen g6. Maybe queen h4. Idea if f4, I have rook to g3. That is probably it. So let me run through that line from the beginning. Queen takes f4, king h1, queen e4 check, f3, queen h4, threatening queen takes h3. I think f4 is basically forced there. And then rook g3. Invade with the rook. Hitting h3, hitting the queen. If the queen moves to the second rank, at the very least we have queen takes h3, queen h2, queen takes f1. I'm never worried about rook c8. I'm always guarding against a queen coming to f6. Yeah, okay, let's do this. Check. Now queen over here. And rook g3, the final touch. White has to give up their queen. Problem solved. Difficult one to end the session. 2 points, but I will take it. Average time on that one is 2:15, and it's only a 35% pass rate, so difficult problem. Took me 4 minutes. Yeah, the sticking point was this position right here. I didn't see rook g3 for what felt like ages. I was looking after f3 at various moves like queen f5, queen g6, because there are different ways that you can attack h3 or g2. Queen f5 is not as strong because f4 and the queen is defending laterally. We don't have rook g3 coming anymore either. And if queen g6 trying to set up queen g2 mate, that works great if white defends with the rook. So we have queen g1 mate, but they can defend with the queen. Queen here. g2 and g1 are both guarded. White escapes. So this just took some finagling, trying to find the best line, and it happens to be queen h4. One possibility here also is if the queen comes to the second rank trying to block, then we have queen takes f1, winning. Okay, so pretty good session, gained some points. We did get that one problem wrong where I felt like my king c5 move at the end of the line should be winning still, but rook g2 was definitely cleaner. And this problem right here, I don't know if you guys can see that. Yes, you can. This problem here was a little sloppy. I felt I could have cleaned up my lines and saw more, especially after knight f3 check, king g4, knight e5, that whole thing. Weird stalemate idea going on. Got a couple of easy problems and one repeat problem as well. This one right here. For the solution to this one, it's a cool one. Check out the previous Climbing the Tactics training video. All right, so I hope you guys enjoyed this one, and I'm over 2,200 now. We're going to keep going. Problems are getting harder. Always solve for accuracy, remember, in your own sessions. One other thing is try not to make your solving sessions too long. I with these videos, are trying to keep these sessions to no more than like 45 minutes at the maximum. I think your solving just degrades after that, your calculation abilities. So try to keep them like 30 minutes maybe is a good number. 30 to 45 minutes. All right, guys. Well, thank you for watching. Let me know if you have any questions or comments, and I will be back soon with more videos. Talk to you later. Bye.